Welcome, everybody. I'm really glad to see a full house to the Parsons Transdisciplinary Seminar. This is a collaboration of the Fine Arts program with the Vera List Center. It's the first time we're doing it this year. I'm really happy to see such good response to it. Today, the seminar always pairs two lectures with each other, one happening one Tuesday after another. Today, Pascal Gielen and Michael Hart, and then the pair with it next week will be Okwi and Vezor, which we're really happy to have. Again, probably it will be as crowded as this, so arrive early if you would like to have a seat. Just to the structure of the program, we'd like to ask you to turn your cell phones off and to commit to being here with us for an hour for the public lecture, because it's a seminar after all. And after the presentations, there will be a brief public Q&A, after which we're going to take a break, and then only the students, there's going to be a book signing in that break, which we're really happy about, and after that, the students of the class will resume to our private conversation with the two lecturers. With this, thank you very much for being here, and I will hand it over to Karin Koni to do an introduction.
I'll do a second introduction, simply introduce the speakers, or attempt to do so as briefly as I possibly can. With us, as you know, are sociologist Pascal Gielen and philosopher Michael Hart. Gielen will be the first speaker, and we'll talk about the exploitation of art in our post-Fordist economy, which very roughly can be characterized as by the rise of the service and white-collar worker and the general emphasis on the consumer, by specialized products and jobs and information technology. Very rough summary of post-Fordist economy. Hart will then respond and argue that the post-Fordist context offers the possibility that artists' skills can be deployed in defense, production, and distribution of the common. You have a very abbreviated biography for both speakers. I just quickly want to remind you that Pascal Gielen is a professor of sociology of the arts at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. He's also research chair of Arts and Society at the Fontys College of the Arts in Tilburg, also the Netherlands. Several of Gielen's books have appeared under the college's label Arts and Society, and among them are Being an Artist in Post-Fordist Society Times, which is available outside at intermission, and also The Murmuring of the Artistic Multitude, Global Art, Memory, and Post-Fordism, also on sale outside. He's currently working on Community Art and Beyond, The Political Potency of Trespassing. Earlier books that Gielen has written are Aesthetics for the Decision Makers, Art in Networks, and Cultural Good, among many others. He has also edited a special edition of the art journal Open, which was dedicated to the biennial as a global phenomenon and had a subtitle of Strategies in Neo-Political Times. And in fact, I believe it was that special issue and a discussion or a series of public events that preceded the publication of this special issue that introduced Pascal Gielen to Michael Hart. Pascal was organizing a number of public events on occasion of the Brussels Biennial, the first and only biennial that ever took place, and Michael Hart was one of your guest speakers. Michael Hart himself is a political philosopher and literary theorist based at Duke University, North Carolina. After graduating with a degree in engineering, he lived in Latin America, working for solar energy companies and also working for various NGOs in Central America after that. Eventually, he moved to the US and received a PhD in 1990 in comparative literature at the University of Washington. Hart is the author of 3 immensely influential books, co-authors with Italian political philosopher Antonio Negri. The first one, Empire, 2000, offers an analysis of the current global power structures and relates them to the transformation of imperialism and the arrival of American dominance after the Vietnam War. Empire was followed by Multitude, War and Democracy in the Age of the Empire in 2004, and Commonwealth, most recently. In addition, Hart is the author of Gilles Deleuze, An Apprenticeship in Philosophy, Labor of Dionysus, A Critique of the State Form, co-written with Negri, Radical Thought in Italy, and The Jameson Reader, and many other publications. As Andrea mentioned, after their lecture, there'll be a brief Q&A, and then again, some of the books that I mentioned will be on sale outside. So thank you very much for coming, and Pascal, why don't you come here? Thanks.
Okay, thank you also, Karen, for inviting me here today to give this lecture and have a small book presentation. I also want to thank Vera Solberg. I studied here 10 years ago for some months with her, and she was at that time she was very influencing me as a sociologist of art. And I certainly want to thank Michael Hart that he went into the invitation to have a discussion here on post-fordism. So what I'm going to do now is give, first of all, a kind of brief introduction in what is post-fordism. It's what I call the educational part of the lecture. Afterwards, I go into a kind of hypothesis I put on this post-fordism and how it is related to the art world. And then I will describe at the end the art scene as a part of the art world and as also a production unit in the art world. So first of all, excuse me for who is already involved or knows already very well post-fordism, but I think it's very important also for the students to explain what is post-fordism about. Okay, when we say post-fordism, we also say or think about, of course, Henry Ford and Fordism. So I have to explain, first of all, what is the difference or what is the connection between Fordism and post-Fordism. Henry Ford, in a way, invented a kind of system which was based on what we call an economy of material products. What is important here is use value. For example, that a car can drive from point A to point B. So it has to be functional. That's a material project. Or a raincoat has to defend you against rain. That's the most important thing. So it has to be functional in a way. A product economy also is based on a typical way of working, what I call, in a very blunt way, material labor. Material labor is based on immobility. You go to work from 9 to 5 or in shifts. You go mostly to work for all your life in the same firm, etc. This is very important as a characteristic of this Fordism. You work with fixing working hours, 9 to 5. And what is important here is you have to do things. Even only putting one wheel the whole day in the car, it is doing. Doing is very important as a characteristic of Fordism. Post-Fordism is much more in the context of evolves in the context in the 70s in what we all know as the consumer economy or consumer society. What is important here in the consumer society is immaterial products which have a kind of symbolic function. So sign value is very important. Nowadays we not only buy a new mobile phone because it doesn't function anymore, but because the design isn't fashionable anymore. So the sign value helps to accumulate in an economical system. I think this is classical, that we already know from some postmodern philosophers has written there about this. But what happens on the immaterial shop floor in labor practice? What we see there is coming up a lot of mobility. We don't have a job for all our lives anymore, but for 5 years, 7 years. We work at several places at the same time. For example, I live in Antwerp, which is in Belgium. It's 400 kilometers from Groningen, where I work and teach, and it is only possible, for example, for me because of the internet. So huge mobility. Flexible working hours, we all know what this is. We don't have to be there anymore between 9 and 5, but can choose our own working hours. Communication becomes up, it's very important, much more than doing. So also talking about what you are doing and explaining about what you're doing becomes involved. What is also important is that you can be detached very quick from one context of work to another context of work, and that you also be very adaptive, that you can see what is changing in the context, and that you can react in a very flexible way to it. So this is very educational, the difference between Fordism and Post-fordism. I sum up some characteristics, and I developed them more about this post-fordist condition. One is, I mentioned already, is physic and mental mobility. This one sociologist, John Urry, we call him sometimes a sociologist of mobility, who has counted, for example, and it was already in 1999, he's written this book and made this study. He counted how many people are in the air at this moment now, and he came to the conclusion that there were 14 million people. So one small nation state is above here. So mobilities is growing, and it was in 1999, so it is still accumulating, etc., etc. So the result or the effect of a post-fordist economy is this physical mobility. But what interests me much more is what I call mental mobility. Post-fordist working is based on an economy of ideas. It is working with ideas. So, and the product is also, in a way, the idea. So what is important here is thinking, working with your head. And we all know when you work with your head, you can work at work, but also at home. You can work in bed, and even in the worst case scenario, at holiday. Because you can't cut off your head when you go out the shop floor. So when when this economy of ideas comes in, you see a kind of hybridity of the private and the working space. And we all know that you can work even at night now, sitting at your computer. I, for example, respond papers of my students at night when I'm here in New York. At every place you can do. So working space and private space are mix up. So we get also not only flexible working hours, but even flowing working hours. You can work every time when you want. So that's even more than flexible. And some classical sociological studies on sociology of labor stress that it delivers a lot of stress to people and give also people a lot of depressions. And one of the results of this is, for example, an enormous accumulation of burnouts. And burnouts is sometimes seen as or felt, when somebody has a burnout, is felt that you are empty, that you don't have any ideas anymore. But in fact, for me as a sociologist, it is the social context social context which wants that you have again and again new ideas. This is very important. So there's always a kind of stress, and now people around you which give you the moral or the ethical feeling that there is still something in your brain and you have to catch it, even if you can't catch it. This is really frustrating, and this is for me a basis for burnout. The frustration that there still is something in your brain somewhere, but you can't find it. So this is for me the idea of burnout and what is a syndrome nowadays, especially in creative and cultural industries, for example. But this sounds very claustrophobic in a way. But at the other side, post-fordist labor is also gives you also a lot of freedom. Because until now, it is impossible to watch in your brain. So also an employer can't see if you're working or if you're not working. So it is possible that you are quite in love, etc., and can't bring good ideas at this moment. He doesn't know, or she doesn't know, the employer. So it is impossible also, that's another thing, to measure the time to have a good idea. You can have a good idea in a second, or you can pretend you're working on it for months. So also this is a kind of thing where you can play with. Also, you can keep your good ideas for when you're working for an employer and give them all only in this firm half good ideas, bad ideas, and keep the good ideas until you have earned a lot of money to build up your own company and then use the good ideas. So you can juggle with this. You can play with ideas. And you also, we all know, you can be lazy. You can do something per month. So there is also, in this post-fordist context, a way of freedom, which is, I have to say, is very individualistic. That's nothing to do with unions, etc. It is an individual way of dealing with these conditions. Another thing, what is important in this post-fordist context is communication. And I quote here one of my favorite philosophers, Paulo Virno, who says in Grammar of the Multitude, the book, that it was until the 70s normal to find these sentences on the shop floor, be quiet, people are working here. It is very important that, for example, even when a person only puts a tire in the car, that he has to be quiet because he has to concentrate on the work. Nowadays, Paulo Virno says, it's almost the opposite. On the shop floor, we see almost this quote, people are working here, speak, speak, speak. Communication is very important. So when this comes up, also the virtuosity of language is very important. And I think language in the broadest sense of the word. Also PowerPoints is a kind of performance. It's a kind of virtual virtuosity, or even a kind of theater, performing. So performing ideas is very important instead of doing. Or you have to do something, but also perform what you are doing. When communication comes in, interhuman relations are very important. It's not only in teamwork, for example, important that somebody has good ideas and is functional. No, also what he's saying, how he's saying, even how he or she is smelling is important in this total context. So then comes also, this is very important, informality gets involved in it. It's important also to get a drink after work, to get informed about other business, etc., etc. So, and also in this work is also trust, especially in an economy of ideas, but I comment this later. Trust, you have to trust each other, and this is important. So, I came up also that informality on the shop floor, which came up very much in the 1970s, is also in a way of control. For example, it is important, or it is functional to have an outward bond with your job, but it is also functional for your employer that he has a good talk with you after work, that he knows how it's with the family, if you're not involved in a divorce, or if you're not alcoholic, etc. Because thinking is central. And he has to know if, or she has to know, if you are still have the opportunities to think. So informality is a kind of control system on this shop floor. Last characteristic I get into, And I have to be honest, a lot of those characteristics are mentioned, for example, by Michael Hart and Antonio Negri in their books, but also by Paulo Virno. The last one is what is explained very nice by Paulo Virno is opportunism. He says that it is functional, it's very functional in a post-Fordist economy to be an opportunist. But he sees it as a very, in an amoral sense, not in a moral sense. He says opportunities is really literally taking opportunities. You have to take the opportunities. This is a very important characteristic and even quality in the post-Fordist context. Why is this important? Because this economical system, an important characteristic of this economical system is what they called chronicle instability. We live in a kind of project economy, or what Boltanski and Schiapella called a project city, even. Those sociologists call it like that, because we don't work anymore for a long life at the same place, but we jump from one project to another project. And this is a very interesting way of working, I say a very interesting way of work to observe as a sociologist, because what happens when you're working in a project? When you're working in a project, you first of all you give all the energy because there is a deadline, and you know that the project has to be finished. So it accumulates a lot of energy, but also time, etc. But another thing what is happening is when you are working in the project, you know it ends, so you're already thinking for the next project. And so while you're not always in, how do you say, you're not in the project anymore mental, because you're already thinking for another project. And this is what is also gives stress, of course, but which is also the basic condition of this work. So chronicle instability makes you thinking in a kind of opportunistic, I don't know, opportunistic way. You have to be aware of what are the next opportunities. So you have to be also aware of an always changing shop floor. You have to be aware of not expected changes and questions. I go through this. So in a way, opportunism is very productive, and again, it is seen as an amoral thing. It's not a moral or ethical thing. Okay, what is now, and now I go further. What's now the relationship between art and post-Fordism? I think when there are artists here in this room, I think they recognize a lot. I think an artist is a prototypical post-Fordist worker in a way. He works always with flowing work hours. We know that the romantic artist works at night at his garret and can work everywhere. He's also, and I go into this later, he's also ask always for his potency, especially in the modern art world or postmodern art world. People are asked for their ideas, not for their products. For example, when a gallery owner, commercial gallery owner, for example, gets involved in your work, he wants that he hopes that you will make still good work afterwards. But what is contracted, if you get a contract, is in fact the potency, the hope for good work, which will get after. So potency is very important in the post-Fordist context, but also in the art world. Virtuosity of language, when ideas are important or become even more important than the artwork itself, the virtuosity of language is very important. You have to talk about